you can settle in now. Let the weight of the day loosen from your shoulders. Let your breath slow and your thoughts grow quiet. The noise of the world emails, headlines, lists, and reminders can wait. For the next little while, you're free. Free to drift into another time, far removed from the flicker of screens and the pressure of calendars. Tonight, we're going back to a world where there were no phones, no pings, and no easy way to send a message. World where every letter, every announcement, every declaration of war or plea for peace had to be carried by foot. Let the hills of ancient Greece begin to rise around you, sun-baked and stubborn. Feel the earth beneath your soles, dry and uneven. Smell the distant sharpness of crushed time beneath your feet. The air is warm, edged with the sound of cicadas in the trees. There's a scroll tied with twine at your hip, and a long road ahead. Tonight you are not a general. You are not a poet or philosopher. You are a message runner. No fame follows your footsteps. No laurel crown waits at the finish. Only dust and the rhythm of your breath. You're not meant to be remembered. Only to move steadily, reliably, and quickly. The city relies on your pace. Relies on your endurance. You don't get to ask questions. You don't get to rest. You just run and deliver and return, then do it all again. The scrolls you carry are tied with string, their ink already beginning to blur from the heat and sweat. You run past olive groves and shepherds over hills that seem to multiply as you climb. You sip from cracked jugs at way stations when you're lucky enough to find one. There are no mile markers, no inns with warm beds, just the occasional goat trail or a donkey cart splashing through the dust. No one celebrates when you arrive. Sometimes the door doesn't open. Sometimes you leave the scroll on a stone weighted by another, and without a word you begin again. Yours is not a path of prestige. It is a path of necessity. It's one that rarely makes it into stories, but without which stories could never be told. And yet here you are, stepping into those sandals, into a life not marked by brilliance, but by resilience. The quiet kind of strength that never asks to be seen, but without it, everything would fall apart. So as you listen tonight, allow yourself to slip into that forgotten rhythm, into the steady breath of ancient miles, the creak of leather straps, the hum of wind through dry grass. Let your modern mind wander into an older world, one where every message required sweat and silence, someone willing to carry it. And while you're here, if you find comfort in these slow journeys through the past, if our quiet walks through forgotten history help your mind unwind, consider subscribing. It lets us keep making these stories for you, one soft step at a time. And before you drift too far into sleep, here is something to think about. If you had to run messages for a living in the ancient world, no phone, no map, just your feet, what's the one thing you'd carry with you besides the scroll? Leave a comment below before you nod off, or come back and tell us in the morning. You are the reason messages move, so breathe in, feel the linen on your skin. Let the ground rise beneath you, step into the silence between cities. Let's begin. The sky is just beginning to lighten, that pale, dusty blue that sits over the hills before the sun fully arrives. You wake on a woven mat that creaks when you shift, the chill of the night still lingering in the air. There's no fire yet, no warmth. It's just your breath visible in the half-light, and the ache already blooming behind your knees from yesterday's journey. You sit up slowly. The muscles in your thighs protest. Your calves are sore. Your feet are raw in places where the sandals rubbed. Always the same spots, always reopening. You don't complain. You don't have anyone to complain to. You're a runner. It's what you do. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a small bowl of barley porridge. Coarse and cold. It sticks to your teeth, fills your belly just enough to stop it from growling, but not enough to provide real energy for the day ahead. You eat it slowly, chewing longer than necessary, not because it tastes good, but because once you're done, the day begins. The message is handed to you without ceremony, small scroll tied with fiber twine. No explanation, no details. You are not important enough to know what it says. It might be a military order, a tax collection notice, or word of someone's death. Whatever it is not your place to ask. Your job is to carry it quickly, without losing it, without stopping, without dying. You secure it in the pouch at your waist, next to a small water flask and a strip of dried fig. That's all you're allowed. You are told where to go, a village tucked behind 2 hills and a dry ravine. You've never been there. You only know the general direction. You nod. You begin. The first steps are always the hardest. Your feet slide awkwardly in your sandals until the sweat returns and holds them in place. The ground is uneven. Rocks and old roots lurking just beneath the dry grass. You listen for the sound of dogs or carts or anything that might force you off the narrow paths. There are no clear roads, just trails worn down by hooves and luck. Sun rises quickly, and so does the heat. Your tunic grows damp beneath your arms. The air smells of dust and goat manure, with a hint of time carried on the wind. It is not unpleasant. It is simply there. It's like everything else, unchanging. As the morning stretches on, you begin to count hills by the burn in your legs. Downhill is worse than up, constant braking. The sharp rocks. The way your toes press into the front of your sandals. The straps dig into your ankles. One is fraying. It will break soon. When it does, you will have to run barefoot. Again, around midday, you stop beneath the low shade of a crooked tree. You sip from your flask. Only a little. There won't be more water until you reach the village. You chew the dried figs slowly. It sticks in your molars. The sun is high now, and it paints everything in a glare. The hills shimmer. The path seems longer than it was before. You start again. You move through thorns that cling to your legs, past shepherds who barely glance your way, past the remains of a collapsed shrine, its stones overtaken by dry moss. You think of nothing. You can't afford to. Thought takes energy. You only focus on the next bend, the next hill, the next marker. Eventually, the village appears. More of a cluster of stone huts than a real town. A goat bleats as you approach. 2 children run from your path. You find the one you're supposed to find. You hand over the scroll. No one thanks you. The man barely looks at you. He unties the string, reads the message in silence, and turns away. That's it. You are not offered a meal. You are not asked to rest. The return route waits. You refill your flask at a communal well. The water is warm and a little gritty, but it will do. And then you begin again. The sandals slap the ground in rhythm. Your legs burn. Your shoulders sagged. A blister has opened on your heel, but you ignore it. You have no choice. By the time you return, the sun is lowering again. The same mat awaits you. The same barley porridge. Same silence. Another scroll may come tomorrow. Or in a few hours. You never know. You just wait, and when it comes, you run. That is the life of a message runner in ancient Greece, not carved in stone, not sung by poets. Just the constant press of one foot after another, day after day, until your knees give out or your lungs no longer keep pace. There is no finish line, only the next hill. And still, someone had to do it. The sandals go on like they always do, not with ease, but with resignation. The leather is stiff, shaped more by use than by design. It doesn't mold to your foot so much as challenge it, a daily test of tolerance. You sit on the low step outside your hut, morning sun slanting across your lap, and begin lacing the thongs around your ankles. The motion is slow, deliberate. There's no reason to rush this part. It will hurt either way. The sandals were never made for running. They were made for walking, maybe for standing perhaps, for looking presentable in the agora, but not for climbing shale hillsides. It's not for descending sharp gravel-strewn switchbacks, and definitely not for covering the distance you're expected to endure. Day after day, mile after mile. You already know where it will hurt. It's that tender patch just beneath your right ankle, the one that still hasn't calloused over. The inside of your left big toe, where the leather edge curls inward like a dried leaf. The base of your heel, where yesterday's blister tried to seal itself shut overnight, only to be torn again the moment your foot slides forward with the first incline. These aren't surprises, they're constants. Familiar aches you greet like old acquaintances. Some runners try to soften their sandals. They soak them, oil them, stuff them with wool or moss. Some even walk on them for days before a run, barefoot, hoping the skin will give in before the leather does. But it never really works. The moment the path turns rocky or the heat dries the straps, the discomfort returns. The leather tightens, the edges bite, and your feet already worn thin. Take the punishment, not to take them off. Not unless you're desperate. Not unless they've snapped or slid off in a mud patch or come apart on a steep descent. Because the only thing worse than running in bad sandals is running barefoot. Some of the older runners still bear the scars, feet split open along the arch, the heel worn down to a smooth, unnatural curve. They talk about broken toenails and bone bruises, not as injuries, but as milestones. Proof that they ran far enough to be hurt. You've had days like that? You try not to remember them in too much detail? Just fragments. The feeling of cool earth when you finally dipped your foot in a stream. The strange burning relief when you pulled the sandal off and saw how red the skin had become. The silent way you tied it back on anyway, because you still had 3 hills to go and no one was coming to help. There are no fresh sandals waiting at the end of a journey, no replacements. You patch what you have. You tie knots in broken straps. You wedge pebbles into worn soles to get a little extra grip. You do whatever keeps you moving forward, because once you stop, you stiffen, and once you stiffen, you start to limp. And a limping runner is a slow runner, and a slow runner is a failed one. Even the best sandals wear out faster than your feet can recover. And when you lie down at night, it's not your back or shoulders that cry the loudest. It's your feet. They pulse with dull heat, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, but refuses to leave. You stretch them out under your blanket and feel every crack in the skin, every press of soreness across the arch, every dull reminder of distance. And then, eventually, you sleep. Not because it stops hurting, but because you've learned to rest with pain. It's just part of the job. In wealthier households, they sometimes talk about sandal makers like artisans, men who shape and stitch with pride, who craft fine straps for merchants or carved soles for generals. But you've never met one of those sandal makers. Yours are traded or handed down, often made in bulk, not fitted, not measured, just tied on and expected to last. Sometimes you think of walking barefoot entirely, the way children do. There's a certain logic to it. No straps to tear, no seams to rub, just skin against earth. Skin bleeds, skin breaks, and scrolls don't wait for healing. So you lace the sandals up again, every day. You double the knot where the leather's worn thin. You shift your gait slightly, favoring the side that stings less, and you begin to run. Not because the sandals make it easier, but because you've learned how to hurt and keep going. The message always arrives in silence. There's no ceremony, no explanation. Just a sealed scroll held out by a hand that barely pauses in front of you. The man who gives it to you doesn't smile. He doesn't make eye contact. You are not his concern. Only the scroll is. It's tied in twine, rough to the touch. The wax seal is still soft around the edges, freshly pressed. You glance at the symbol, but it means nothing to you. A stylized owl? A crooked spear? A name or city crest you've seen a dozen times before, but never understood? You do not read it. You are not meant to. It is not for you. You're given no briefing, no summary, no sense of urgency or emotion. It could be a request for grain, a call to arms, news of a birth, or a death, or a betrayal. It could mean war. It could mean peace. It could mean absolutely nothing. You're not told. And still, it is everything. Because once it's in your hand, it becomes your responsibility. You tuck it carefully into your satchel, beneath the fold of your tunic, away from the sun, away from moisture. You check the knot twice. You feel for it even when you don't need to. Small weight. Not heavy in size, but heavy in consequence. You are not part of the message. You are just the legs that move it forward. There is a strange kind of discipline in not knowing. You learn not to speculate. Not to imagine the consequences of being late or being wrong or being intercepted. If something happens to the scroll, a tear, a stain, a lost seal, you'll be blamed. Not the sender, not the wind, not the hill that tripped you, just you. And yet they never tell you what it says, because knowledge is risk. Words are power, and you are a runner. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to read one. Just once, to break the seal and unroll it slowly under a quiet tree far off the road. Just to know what you carry, just to feel, for a moment, part of the decision instead of just its delivery. But you don't. You wouldn't. The punishment for tampering is severe. They wouldn't even ask questions. You would disappear from the runner's path like a shadow at dusk. No one would speak your name again. And so, you don't ask. Instead, you ask practical things. How far, north or south, through the pass or around it? Is the bridge still intact? Will anyone meet you at the village edge? Sometimes they shrug. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they wave a hand vaguely in the direction of hills and expect you to find your own way. So you nod and begin. The scroll doesn't feel any different than any other you've carried. And yet each one holds a kind of gravity, like a stone in your pouch, pulling you forward or down, depending on the road. You imagine the people on the other end. The man who will open the scroll. The wife who will hear the news. The soldier who will be summoned. The elder who will weigh the message before stamping a reply. All of it starts with you. And you'll never know how it ends. There's a strange poetry to that. Being the start of something without ever seeing its finish. Being necessary, but forgotten. You imagine history as a long chain of scrolls passed hand to hand, never stopping, always moving because of people like you. People who don't write the words, who don't speak them aloud, who just keep them safe and in motion. It's strange, too, how easily you begin to measure time by scrolls. You don't say a week ago, you say 2 scrolls ago. You remember places not by their sights or smells, but by the shape of the seal you were carrying when you arrived. A crooked tree, a carved stone, the old man with the limp, each one tied to a different delivery, a different secret you never got to know. Sometimes, rarely, someone will ask you what you think might be inside. A child, perhaps, a curious farmer. But you just shake your head, not because you're being mysterious, but because you've trained yourself not to wonder. The less you imagine, the less you carry. The less you carry, the faster you run. And that is all you are meant to do. When the scroll is finally delivered, The moment is quiet. You remove it carefully. You check the seal once more. You hand it over. Recipient doesn't thank you. He simply nods, breaks the wax, begins to read. You never wait for the reaction. You just turn around, out, and walk away. And if another scroll is waiting when you return, you take it. You nod, you tuck it into the pouch, and begin again. The scroll is secured, the path ahead, unclear, but it always begins with the hills. They rise in front of you like ancient shoulders, worn but unmoved, the same way they've greeted runners for centuries. Not towering or sharp, just constant, relentless. The kind of hills that don't intimidate with height, but with repetition. You crest one, only to see another, and another, and another. The first hill is the steepest. It always feels that way, even when it isn't. It's where your legs still remember the comfort of sitting. It's where your lungs adjust to the effort. Where your mind, still echoing with morning silence, resists the rhythm of exertion. The ground is loose beneath your feet, dust and pebbles that shift under every step. Your sandals slide, pulling awkwardly against the slope. You lean forward, head down, arms loose, heart pounding, and the sun. Even early in the day, it has presence. There are no trees here, no overhangs, no traveler's rest. Just open air, dry and pressing. The wind does little to cool you. It whips sideways across the path, bringing more dust than relief. It carries the scent of salt and baked earth, and something older, like the breath of stone. It does not soothe. It only reminds you of distance. You do not stop. There's no point, no shade to rest in, no marker to pause beside. Stopping only prolongs the climb, and the climb will not change. The hill does not care. You focus on the sound of your breath, a rhythm you've trained yourself to trust. Inhale, 2 steps. Exhale, 3 steps. Repeat. A pattern more familiar than language. It's how you know you're still capable. It's how you know when something's wrong. Birds call above you unseen. Somewhere in the scrub, a lizard darts. But mostly, the land is still, empty, quiet, except for you. If you squint at the horizon, you can make out the shimmer of another runner in the distance. A flash of white tunic against the dry hills. Quickly gone again behind a ridge. You don't wave. You don't speak. The path is lonely by design. There are moments where the incline disappears beneath you. You feel suspended. Between sky and stone, between purpose and fatigue. Your legs keep moving, but your thoughts drift. Not in words, just in sensation. The dust on your calves, the creak of your satchel. Boy, the wind pulls at your tunic like it wants to read the message too. At the top, there is no reward. No applause, no marker. Just a brief flattening of the earth. A place to adjust your footing, to taste the dryness in your throat. And then the descent begins. Going downhill brings no comfort. The path turns unpredictable. Too fast, and your sandals slip. Slow, and your knees protest. Your toes press forward in the straps until you feel the sting of skin against leather. You try to stay light, balanced. You know too well the cost of a misstep. One twist, one fall, and the scroll is late, or lost, or both. The wind is stronger now, funneled by the curves of the valley below. It whistles in your ears. It dries the sweat on your forehead too quickly, leaving salt behind. You wipe your face with the back of your hand and keep moving.
Ow.
No one builds homes here. There are no wells, no shaded shrines. Just crickets in the grass and the crunch of gravel underfoot. The hills belong to no one. They're not a destination, only something to cross. By midday, the heat deepens. It's not sharp, but heavy. a blanket of warmth that drapes over your shoulders and sinks into your spine. You feel it in your breath, slower now. Not labored, but deliberate. You ration your water carefully, though your body begs for more. The scroll presses lightly against your side as you run, but its weight is not measured in grams. It's measured in consequences. You are not just carrying a message, you are carrying time. And in ancient Greece, time was unforgiving. There's no margin for error, no buffer for rest, no cushion for delay. The scroll must arrive when expected, not because someone is impatient, but because someone is depending on it. Orders are given in minutes, decisions are made in hours. A missed message isn't an inconvenience, it's a loss, battle delayed, a shipment missed, a truce broken, a life gone. No one tells you directly, but everyone knows. There are stories. Runners who didn't make it. A scroll that arrived too late. Commander who charged without orders. Village that held its gates shut a day too long. In those stories, there is no villain, no grand betrayal. It's just a twisted ankle, a flooded crossing, a heat wave, a delay. And someone dies, and no one tells the runner's side of the story. That's what stays with you. Not the threat, but the silence that follows failure. A runner who didn't return, scroll that arrived untouched but useless. The seal still intact, the news still fresh but irrelevant. Time had already moved on. You think about that more than you'd like to, not in a panicked way, not even fear exactly. More like a quiet, steady awareness that your pace matters more than your comfort, more than your pain, more than your thoughts. You move because not moving has consequences you never fully see, but that others will carry. There are days when you wake up sore, your calves tight from the previous run, and wonder if you're slower now. If your legs are losing their rhythm, that extra drink of water, that extra pause beneath the olive tree, might cost someone something you can't take back. You've never been late, but you've been close. Once, when the river overflowed its banks. Once, when your sandal strap broke at the worst possible moment. Once, when you lost your way at a fork in the trail that wasn't there before. Each time you ran faster than you thought you could, you didn't stop. You didn't think. You just moved. Not because you were heroic, but because you were terrified of what might happen if you weren't fast enough. The city doesn't remember fast runners, only timely ones. That's what they value. Arrival, punctual, precise, unnoticed. There is no applause when you make it. There's no feast or festival. The message is taken. The scroll is opened. The wax seal crumbles. A new decision is made and you are already walking away. You hear rumors of runners punished for lateness. Some cast out, some imprisoned, others quietly removed from the rotation. Their names no longer spoken, their routes reassigned. It isn't about blame, it's about trust. And if they can't trust you to outrun time, they will find someone else who can. You feel it every time you run. Quiet urgency, an invisible clock that started ticking the moment the scroll hit your palm. No one tells you how long you have. You're expected to know. You're expected to feel it in your bones. And you do, not in hours, but in terrain. 2 ridges before midday, a valley and a spring by dusk, arrive before the stars rise. That's how you think. That's how you live. Other people measure time in sunrises, in meals, in songs. Measure it in pace, in hills, in breath. Some days you pass the burned remains of a tower or a village long gone. The air is still there. The stones are still there. But the people are not. You wonder if a message was delayed. If a runner failed, if it was someone like you. And you tighten your straps. You keep running. Because no one wants to carry that silence. You'll never know what your scroll contains. But you know what it means. You know what delay looks like. You know what happens when you are too late. So you are not late. You cannot be. And that's why you run. The hills seem steeper after noon. Your shadow shortens, then stretches again. You've run this stretch before, though you can't recall when. The rocks change shape. The trail shifts, but the rhythm stays the same. Climb, breathe, descend. Repeat. And all the while the scroll presses against your hip like a quiet reminder. This isn't about you. It never was. It's about what must be moved from one side of the hill to the other. What must be delivered even when the sun burns and the wind bites and the shade never comes. There is no glory in this stretch of road. Just the dry wind, the path ahead, and the runner who keeps going anyway. And so you do. The scroll is secure. Your pace is steady. But your mind never fully rests. No. There's always something. A shift in the wind. A rustle in the brush. The echo of footsteps, not yours. From somewhere just out of sight, you've trained yourself to move quickly, to breathe evenly, to think only as much as necessary. But still, the worry creeps in, silent and persistent. Like the dust that works its way into your sandals. It's always there, no matter how tightly you tie the straps. You know the path, or at least you think you do. But paths change, rocks fall, streams swell. A route you took last week may now be washed out or blocked by a fallen fig tree. You could miss a turn. Or worse, follow a trail that leads nowhere. Every bend hides a possibility. Most are harmless. A shepherd, a goat, a boy gathering herbs. Not all. Robbers are rare, but not rare enough. They don't wear masks or leap from trees. They wait, still and patient, watching for runners like you, alone, fast, lightly armed, and always carrying something. They don't know what's in your satchel, but they know it's worth something to someone, and sometimes that's enough. They don't always take the scroll. Sometimes it's your sandals. Sometimes it's your water flask. Sometimes it's just your time. Stripped away as you lie winded by the trail, your message still sealed, but your legs too bruised to continue. And then there are the storms, if you can see them before they arrive. Black clouds swelling along the horizon like spilled ink. You try to calculate. Can you make it across the open field before the rain starts? Will the clay trail turn to sludge before you reach the next ridge? You've run through rain before. The cold bites deep. The scroll must be shielded beneath your tunic. The wind stings your face, and the mud clings to your feet like it wants to pull you under. Visibility fades to shadows. You slip, you fall, you rise, and still you run. It's not the storm that scares you. It's what the storm hides. Loose footing, sudden gullies, paths that vanish beneath the flood, and worse, the way the landscape changes. Stream where there was none, a tree fallen across your usual way. Your familiar path, unfamiliar, and always, always the rocks. They don't look dangerous. They never do. It's just small stones scattered across a slope or tucked into the folds of a dirt trail. But it only takes one. One bad step, one shifted ankle, one slide that sends you tumbling into thorn and soil. You'll learn to scan the ground with every step. Not thinking, just sensing. You feel for danger with your soles. You memorize how earth should sound when it's firm beneath you. You adjust your stride constantly. A little shorter here, a little wider there. You adapt without thought because thought takes time, and time is not yours. You've stumbled before. Everyone has. A bruised knee, a torn hem, a twisted ankle that healed slower than it should have. You learn then, it isn't the fall that costs you, it's the pause. Because every second you spend brushing dirt from your tunic is a second the message ISNT moving forward. Every moment you spend checking a wound is a moment the scroll sits still. And in your world, stillness is the greatest danger of all. Even the animals can be a threat. A startled mule on a narrow path. A dog with an uncertain bark. A snake stretched across a sun-warmed stone. You never know what the day will hold. You only know that you'll be the one running through it, and so you worry. Not with panic, not loudly. Lives beneath your ribs, just behind your breath. A low humming tension that never quite fades. It keeps you alert, sharp, ready. Because one moment of distraction, one thought too many, and something goes wrong. Sometimes the worry follows you into sleep. You lie on your mat and dream not of falling, but of forgetting. Of waking too late, of choosing the wrong road, of arriving to find the place abandoned, the door closed, the moment already lost. You wake with your heart pounding, not from fear, from memory, but you get up. You tighten your sandals, you take the scroll, and you run. Because despite the worry, or maybe because of it, you know what must be done. You know what is required. You know the road doesn't care if you're tired or nervous or sore. You keep moving, because the cost of not moving is always greater. You arrive late in the day. Sun leans low behind the hills now, softening the sharp edges of the path, tinting everything in gold. Your tunic is damp with sweat, stained at the hem. Your legs feel hollow. Not quite pain, just absence. An echo of motion still vibrating through your calves and knees. You don't walk so much as coast. Your feet trained to move even after the destination has been reached. The village is small, quiet. Smoke curls lazily from a few chimneys. Someone is tending goats in the distance. No one greets you. No one is waiting with arms open or questions at the ready. You find the person you're meant to find, or maybe they find you. You don't remember the exact moment. It happens like it always does. Brief, efficient. The hand extends. You pass over the scroll. Leaves your pouch without ceremony. Its weight replaced by a familiar lightness. You wait just long enough to make sure they've accepted it. You don't ask what it said. You never do. There's no thank you. No handshake. No eye contact. They simply turn away, scroll in hand, already unfolding it, already forgetting you were there. You stand still for a moment, not because you expect anything more, but because you're gathering yourself for the return. There is no fanfare for a runner. There are no stories sung at the symposium, no statues carved in your likeness. Your name will not be remembered. It was never recorded. You pass through places like wind between stones. Felt, but not held. Sometimes someone offers you a crust of bread. Not always, not warmly. It's handed to you the same way you handed over the scroll. Not as a gift, as a transaction. Your presence is tolerated, your hunger assumed. You accept the bread without words and chew it slowly, your jaw aching from the effort, your body grateful for something solid. Maybe you get a nod, a quiet glance, a vague motion toward a shaded spot by a wall where you can sit for a minute. It's not welcome exactly, but it's not rejection either. It's just recognition that you exist, that you've done your part, that now you may rest. Briefly. You refill your water flask at a communal basin. The water is lukewarm, metallic from the clay. You drink in slow sips, trying not to cough. You splash your face, wipe the dust from your neck. But there's no time to linger. You have to go back. Sometimes a reply is ready. A second scroll. Another direction. Another path. Sometimes there is no message. Only the silent understanding that your job for now is done. But you don't stay. Runners don't stay. You sleep where you can, on hard-packed ground. In corners. Beneath fig trees or along the side of a barn, pressed against the earth like a forgotten tool. No pillow, no fire. just the stars and the sounds of the night. There are no stories about runners, not the way they are about generals or athletes or poets. You will not be honored in the public square. No child will memorize your path. You are not remembered for bravery or wisdom or words, only movement, only distance, only delivery. But still you run, because if the message doesn't arrive, someone else suffers. Someone who is remembered, someone who is important. You've learned to take pride in the silence, the fact that no one knows your name, because that means you did everything right. The scroll arrived, the seal was unbroken. The words reached their reader. History moved forward, and you stepped quietly out of the way. So you finished the bread. Wipe the crumbs from your lap. Tighten the strap on your sandal, and turn back the way you came. No applause, just a crust of bread and a nod, and the long road behind you, waiting to be run again. You've probably heard the story. A lone runner, a battlefield, a desperate message. He runs from Marathon to Athens, breathless, battered, heroic. He bursts into the city, delivers a single word, victory, and then collapses dead. It's one of the most famous images from ancient history, a symbol of endurance, a selfless service, a patriotic sacrifice. But, like most things, remembered with poetic clarity, the real story is far more complex and far less glorious. Let's begin where legend often ends. On the dusty plain of Marathon, in 490 BCE, a battle had just been won. The mighty Persian army, outnumbering the Athenians, had been repelled. It was a stunning victory, and one that needed to be shared quickly. According to the simplified tale, a soldier named Pheidippides ran the roughly 25 miles from the battlefield at Marathon to the city of Athens. He was fast. He was brave. He made it. And then, overwhelmed by exhaustion, he died on the spot. But history, especially when passed down through centuries of storytelling, tends to blur the line between poetry and truth. And Pheidippides' story, it's much bigger and much harder. Because that short dash to Athens, it wasn't his main run. It wasn't even the hardest part. Before the battle ever began, Pheidippides had already completed a far more brutal journey. Not from Marathon to Athens, but from Athens to Sparta. Roughly 140 miles. One way on foot. Through mountainous terrain, across valleys, over crags and ravines, in heat, in solitude. With nothing but a message and the pressure of hope on his shoulders. He wasn't just delivering news. He was pleading for help. Athens, aware of the looming Persian threat, needed reinforcements. And fast. Sparta, the warrior state, fierce and disciplined, was their only hope. But they were days away, and the message had to be delivered by one man. There were no relay teams, no horses, no brakes, just Pheidippides. He was what was known as a hemerodromos, a day-long runner trained for long-distance endurance. Not in the way a modern athlete is trained, with protein shakes and breathing coaches, but in the way of necessity. Long legs, lean muscles, a steady heart, a body shaped by terrain and duty. He set out from Athens with nothing but crude sandals and a stomach of barley. No roads, no markers. Just dry trails and footpaths carved by shepherds and goats. He ran by sunlight. He ran by starlight. He ran through the wilderness with wolves in the hills and the dark pressing close. He stopped only to drink from rivers or to dodge thorns. Slept, if at all, beneath trees, his back against rock, his eyes never fully closed. He carried the weight of the city on his legs, and when he arrived in Sparta, finally blistered, ragged, and coated in dust, the Spartans listened politely and said no. Or at least not yet. 8. It was their sacred festival, the Carnea, and Spartan custom forbade them from marching to war until the moon was full. Religion came before alliance, even as enemies approached. So Pheidippides turned back. Another 140 miles, alone again. The part of the story we often remember, that short burst from Marathon to Athens, was not a dramatic centerpiece. It was an aftershock, final sprint tacked onto a saga of endurance. Most of us would never imagine attempting. He had already run farther than most men ever would. He had delivered pleas. He had returned with disappointment. And then, after fighting in the very battle at Marathon itself, sword drawn, breath ragged, muscles already past their limit, he ran one last time. 25 more miles, straight to Athens. And only then, with his lungs burning, heart pounding, vision dimming, did he deliver the message, victory, and then he collapsed, not in triumph, but in silence. Forget everything you think you know about the Marathon, because the real story, the one buried beneath centuries of simplification and storytelling, starts not on the battlefield of Marathon, but in the crowded, sunlit streets of Athens. Before the fight, before the victory, before the famous last breath. Because the Persians were coming, and the Athenians knew they couldn't face them alone. They needed help, desperately. And the only help worth asking for was 140 miles away, Sparta. So they turned to a man, one man to carry the request. Not a team of couriers, not a squad of riders, just one runner, Pheidippides, a Hemrodromos, a long-distance day runner, trained not in sprints but in stamina, in silence, in sheer persistent motion. No fanfare, no parade, just a nod, a scroll, and the road. Athens to Sparta. 140 miles of uncertainty. There were no paved highways, no road signs, no rest stops with water jugs and shaded benches. It's just dirt tracks winding through scrub, over jagged hills, across riverbeds, and past outposts that were a little more than crumbling stones and curious goats. The land between Athens and Sparta was rugged and vast. To the north, dry plateaus. To the east, gnarled forests and sudden drops. To the west, stretches of land so open and exposed that the heat came not just from above, but from all around. Rising from the earth itself, wrapping the runner in a layer of invisible weight. He ran through valleys where shepherds may have watched him pass without a word, ran past towns that had no idea a war was coming, past shrines where the gods watched silently, offering no shortcuts, and at night he kept going. In darkness, there were no torches, no guideposts, only moonlight. And the rhythm of his feet against the soil, and this wasn't a flat course, this was Greece. A country carved by mountains and tilted valleys. 1 hour you're climbing a brutal incline, the next you're stumbling downhill, trying not to twist an ankle on loose stones. Even the flat sections weren't really flat. They were uneven, cracked, unpredictable. He wore no armor, no protective clothing. It's just a simple tunic, crude sandals, and a body taught to endure. Some historians believe he may have carried a small dagger, in case of wild animals or worse. Men who didn't care what city you ran for. There were always bandits somewhere, hiding, watching, waiting for a lone traveler whose steps sounded just a little too steady, a little too purposeful. And yet he kept moving. There was no time to rest. No guarantee he'd make it. Just the message in his mind and the silence of the land. He likely stopped at springs to drink, splashing his face, kneeling briefly to rinse his legs, but not long. Time was not a luxury he had, and the further he ran, the more his muscles burned, the more his breath came like sandpaper through a reed, the more his thoughts narrowed to a single idea. Keep going. Because if he stopped, Athens might fall. It's hard to know exactly how long it took him. Some say 2 days, some slightly more. But what matters isn't the number of hours. What matters is that he arrived. He made it. Not in triumph, not in celebration. He arrived in Sparta not as a hero, but as a messenger. Dust-covered, calloused eyes, red from sun and wind. Legs trembling, voice likely hoarse from the dryness in his throat. But he stood, and he spoke. He delivered the plea, "Help us. The Persians are coming. We need you." And then Spartan said no, or at least not yet. It was their sacred festival, the Carnia. No marching to war until the next full moon. Custom first, gods before men. Pheidippides could do nothing but nod, turn around. Another 140 miles. Alone. On foot. Back through the wilderness. It's this run, not the final one from Marathon to Athens, that defines the reality behind the myth. This is not the story of a man who ran a tidy 25 miles in the name of victory. It's the story of a man who ran nearly 300 miles in total, with no certainty, no backup, no praise. Just duty and desperation, sandals that offered no kindness to his feet. No one stood cheering at the finish line. No amphora of water waiting at the end. He wasn't racing for a prize or glory. He was racing against collapse. The terrain didn't care who he was. The wolves in the hills didn't care about Persia. The dry riverbeds didn't know about Sparta. The message lived or died with his steps, and his steps didn't stop. So the next time someone mentions a marathon, the modern race, the medals, the crowd, remember the run that came before? The one with no start gun, no finish line, just a man, a road, and 140 miles of silence. Imagine a world before roads, not just before pavement, but before the very idea of a road as we know it. No straight lines, no carved paths wide enough for carts. No signs, no markers, no milestones to count the distance. Just land, raw, uneven, and indifferent to your footsteps. That was the Greece Pheidippides ran through. The path from Athens to Sparta wasn't really a path at all. It was a suggestion. A general direction passed down through local knowledge and rough instinct. There were goat trails, perhaps. Worn foot tracks between villages, but mostly it was wilderness. And wilderness doesn't make it easy. The terrain varied wildly. One moment you were climbing a narrow ridge where the earth broke off sharply into shadowed valleys. The next you were stumbling through rocky lowlands littered with gnarled roots and uneven ground. The stones were never the same size. The soil shifted. The trail disappeared whenever the wind carried dust high enough to settle over everything. Mountains were common. Greece is not a flat land. The ancient traveler knew this well. Pheidippides had no way to go around most of the mountains. He went over them, slowly, relentlessly, legs burning with each upward stride. Lungs tight from the thinning air, sandals slipping slightly with every step. Then came the descent. Not easier, just different. Knees jolted with every footfall. Ankles braced for the wrong kind of rock. One misstep could end the entire journey. One twist, one fall, one unexpected drop, and the message would vanish with the man who carried it. There were no bridges. If a river was full, he had to wade. If the current was too strong, he had to wait. But he didn't have time to wait, so he crossed anyway. Chest-deep scroll raised above his head, sandals heavy with water, the current tugging at his legs like fingers trying to pull him off course. Forests came next, dense and shadowed with twisted trees that blocked the light even at midday. The air was cooler there, but still, it wasn't peace he found in the shade. It was silence. Quiet that felt less like rest and more like watching. Unseen eyes in the brush. It's a creak of branches that might have been the wind, or something else. Yeah, there were no maps. He relied on memory. On the shape of the hills, the position of the sun, the landmarks known only to those who traveled often and survived long enough to remember them, a particular bend in a stream. A cluster of stone ruins where travelers once left offerings. A crooked tree where paths diverged, and only one lead where he needed to go. But even these weren't reliable. The wilderness didn't care about consistency. A fallen tree could hide a fork in the trail. A washed-out gully could turn a familiar crossing into a death trap. One week's shortcut was the next week's dead end, and he was alone. Utterly, entirely alone. There were no relay runners, no companions to talk to, no guards, no backup, just his feet, the sky above, and the pulse of the message in his mind. No one to ask for directions, no one to send word ahead, no one to catch him if he fell. Even the animals were reminders of solitude. Sudden rustle in the bushes could be a rabbit, or a snake, or a jackal. Even the birds seemed to move more cautiously. When you ran alone through unfamiliar trees, at night, the world changed again. The stars were bright, yes, but they offered no warmth, no safety. The cold crept into his bones. The dark made every stone look the same. There were no campfires for him, no loud talking, no light to guide the way. Only the scrape of sandal on soil, the sound of his own breath, and the distant howl of something wild, too far to see, too close to ignore, and still he ran. Not for glory. Not for thanks, just to move the message across this unruly stretch of land. Just to survive one more mile. This wasn't a path for runners. It was a test, a crucible. And those who crossed it did so not with speed, but with silence, with patience. With pain, the land gave him no help. The trees gave no shade worth stopping for. The hills asked for his breath, and the valleys offered no rest. Even the wind worked against him, carrying dust, blinding his eyes, tugging at the scroll tucked beneath his tunic. But he kept going, 'cause wilderness is not an obstacle to those who have no choice. And in that silence, in that vast and unkind stretch of land between two cities, one man ran. Not for glory, not for legacy, but because someone had to. Pheidippides didn't lace up lightweight shoes. He didn't stretch on a foam mat. He didn't wear moisture-wicking fabric or carry an electrolyte pouch. There was no breathable mesh, no reinforced soles, no gel inserts to soften the impact of every footfall. What he had was far simpler and far harsher. A tunic, a belt, sandals made from stiff leather. And the kind of body that doesn't come from training schedules or gym memberships, but from necessity. From living a life in motion, sandals alone were punishment enough. Strips of hide wrapped across the top of the foot, secured with thongs that dug into the skin. No arch support, no cushioning, just the thinnest barrier between flesh and stone. And often, not even that. When the straps tore, and they did, runners like Pheidippides simply kept going barefoot. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The scroll he carried was likely tucked inside a satchel at his side or tied in the fold of his belt. There was no protective case, no waterproof pouch. Just a careful placement of parchment, sealed with wax and pressed close to the body to protect it from wind, rain, or sweat. He may have had a blade, not for ceremony, but for survival. Something small, notched, hung low at his hip. Not to fight off invaders, but to cut a snare, whittle a stick, or defend himself if absolutely cornered. But otherwise, nothing. No water bottle, no spare clothes, no pack of supplies. There was no room for extra weight. Every step had to be earned. He ran with a mind clear of distraction and a body tuned only to function. Muscles not grown for show, but for endurance. Skin toughened from years of sun and grit. Joints that ached even before the run began and kept aching long after it ended. His food, if any, would have been carried in pieces. A fig, a handful of barley, dried meat if he was lucky. But even these were risks. Food meant weight, and weight slowed the journey. So he ran hungry more often than not. Fed by urgency, driven by the knowledge that someone was waiting, that someone needed to hear what he carried, and he wasn't alone in this simplicity. The role of the Hamardramas, the long-distance day runner, was never built on comfort. These men were human infrastructure, living arteries in a world without roads, without riders, without systems of reliable communication. Their training was repetition. Their gear was willpower. They didn't ask for recognition. They didn't wait for thanks. They just ran. And when the sandals gave out, when the leather split or the strap unraveled, there was no stopping to repair it. You adapted. You limped. You shifted your weight to the side with less pain. You felt the stone grind against skin and kept going anyway, because messages didn't wait, and duty didn't pause. There's something almost unimaginable about that kind of simplicity now. No sports drinks, no coaching apps, no social media posts about personal records. Just a body, a scroll, and the landscape. And yet, this was the standard, the expectation, the accepted way. Even as the terrain tore at his feet, even as the weather closed in, even as thirst and fatigue gnawed at his will, he was still expected to move. Not because he had the best equipment, but because there was no other option. In a strange way, the lack of gear didn't weaken him. It hardened him, made every mile a decision, not a performance. Every step a choice to continue. And as you imagine him, thin, dust-covered eyes, sharp from watching for snakes or strangers, calves aching, breath shallow but steady, there's no illusion of grandeur, only grit, only silence. Only a man so focused on the finish that he left everything else behind. No flag draped over his shoulders, no medal, no finish line painted on the ground, just the desperate rhythm of sandals or bare feet against stone. And the knowledge that his only reward would be the chance to stop running. The story always ends with a flourish. The runner arrives. The word victory escapes his lips. And then, as if perfectly timed, he falls, silent, spent, dead. It reads like a tragic triumph, a noble sacrifice. It's the kind of tale that stirs something deep. But beneath the rhythm of that well-known myth is a quieter truth, one that doesn't shine, one that doesn't cheer, one that simply lingers and asks, what really happened? Did Pheidippides collapse in a public square? Did he speak that single word with his final breath? Or is that just the version that's easier to remember? No ancient source agrees exactly. Herodotus, the earliest historian who tells the story, doesn't even mention a death at all. In fact, his account focuses entirely on the much longer run to Sparta. The dramatic collapse in Athens, it came from later writers, generations removed, who layered in detail, drama, and meaning. But even if it's true, even if he did die after running to Athens, it probably wasn't what we picture. He didn't arrive to fanfare. There were no cheering crowds, no trumpet blast, no laurel wreath. He would have entered the city as just another dusty figure on the road, sweats licked and stooped from miles already run, his sandals worn, his tunic clinging, his message simple. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a king, wasn't a legend in his own eyes. He was a messenger, a tool of the polis, a man with a job. And if he died, it wasn't for glory, it was from exhaustion. From pushing his body past the point of return, it's not for recognition, but for responsibility. He wasn't running for a legacy. He was running because someone asked him to. There's no evidence that his final word was Nike, no confirmation that he collapsed in the center of the city. Maybe he said nothing. Maybe he collapsed in an alley. Maybe he handed off the scroll and stumbled into shadow. Maybe no one even noticed that he'd stopped breathing until the message had already been opened. And maybe that's the most honest part of it. There was no glory, no legacy, no statue waiting for him on the other end. Just a job done, a message delivered, a body pushed until it couldn't continue, and yet we turned it into legend. We wrapped his final breath in poetry, turned his collapse into something beautiful, because that's what we like. Endings that echo, that sound like sacrifice and triumph, that elevate a messenger into a martyr. But maybe that's not what really happened. Maybe he stumbled. Maybe he wheezed out half a sentence. Maybe no one even looked up when he arrived. Maybe the city was busy. Maybe they took the message and walked away and left him to sit in the dust. And still, that doesn't make it less meaningful. In fact, it makes it more. Because there's something deeply human about that kind of end. An end that isn't written in song or carved in stone. It's an end that doesn't involve crowds or praise. It's just someone giving everything they had for something they would never benefit from. Pheidippides didn't run for applause. He didn't hope to be remembered. He ran because someone needed him to, because Athens was under threat, because the message had to get there. And when it was done, he fell, not in front of a crowd, not with a chorus, but quietly. The world kept moving. That's the part we forget. That sometimes the most important things are done by people no one thanks. That sometimes a legacy is built not from loud gestures, but from quiet exhaustion. From doing what must be done, even when no one will remember your name. So if he died that day, he died in motion, not remembered as a hero, not celebrated in his time, but still a hero. Maybe that's enough. When we imagine ancient greatness, we tend to imagine crowds. Applause, sunlight catching on bronze, hero returning from battle, greeted by banners, songs, and open arms. But for men like Pheidippides, there was none of that. No audience, no glory. Just one foot in front of the other and a message that had to be delivered. The path from Marathon to Athens was not ceremonial. It wasn't a stage for triumph, rough, sun-baked, unkind. It's 25 miles of terrain that asked more of him than most could give. He had already pushed his body beyond its limits. He had run to Sparta and back. He had fought in the battle. He had stood, likely trembling, when the Persian line finally broke. And then, after all that, he ran again. He ran because someone had to, not for recognition, not to be remembered, but because the city needed to know. They needed to know now. There were no people waiting for him at the gates, no one tracking his progress, no crowd to part as he reached the city. He wasn't running toward fame, he was running into indifference, into the noise and motion of a city already preparing for its next move. And when he arrived, if he made it all the way, the message was the only thing that mattered. Not the runner, not his condition, not his name. Just the message. He may have gasped it aloud. He may have handed it over. Or he may have collapsed with the scroll still clutched in his fist. It's hard to say, the sources don't agree. And the silence around those details says as much as any line of ancient text ever could. There was no fanfare, no amphora of cool water, no bed waiting for him. only the knowledge, if he was even still conscious, that he had completed what was asked of him. It's easy to wrap the myth in glory, to imagine his final breath as a noble offering, to turn exhaustion into poetry. But the truth is likely far more quiet, far more human. He may have fallen in an alley. He may have collapsed unnoticed. The message delivered. His body forgotten. And that is what makes his story powerful. Not because it ends in celebration, but because it doesn't. Because it reminds us that some of the most important acts in history were done without applause, without statues, without a single witness. Pheidippides was just one man, dust-covered, sore, probably limping. No audience, no reward. And yet he moved. He moved with urgency, with pain, with no promise of recognition, and that movement mattered. It connected battlefield to city, message to moment, action to decision. He didn't do it to be remembered. He did it because it was necessary, and then disappeared. No name carved into stone, no song sung in his honor, just silence, and the long stretch of road behind him. Before phones, before mail, before horses carried sealed envelopes through empires, there were feet and sweat and silence. In ancient Greece, communication was an instant. It wasn't even reliable. Every message that moved between cities did so by muscle. One person, one message. Long, uncertain path between sender and receiver. The Greeks didn't have an organized postal system like the Persians or Romans would later develop. There was no network of state-sponsored messengers, no standardized routes, no relay stations, with fresh runners waiting to pick up the next leg. Each city-state, each polis handled communication in its own way, relying mostly on trusted individuals to carry critical information from one place to another. Sometimes that meant hiring a hemardromos, a long-distance day runner, someone like Pheidippides, someone lean, fast, and familiar with the terrain. They could be dispatched across dozens, even hundreds of miles, carrying a scroll wrapped in cloth or a message memorized word for word. These runners were human infrastructure, flexible, disposable, and essential. Other times, cities relied on passing travelers. Merchants, pilgrims, or shepherds moving between towns might be given a message to carry. Unofficial, untrained, and unpredictable, but better than nothing. A message that reached its destination late was still more useful than one that never left at all. If the message was urgent, military orders, diplomatic decisions, news of an enemy army approaching, a runner was sent immediately, day or night, rain or sun. It were nothing more than a direction and the hope they'd arrive in time. If it wasn't urgent, cities waited. They bundled letters together and sent them in batches. Sometimes they waited weeks. Sometimes the moment passed before the message even left. And what did these runners face on the road? Everything. The Greek landscape was beautiful, yes, but unkind. Hills, stones, heat, narrow passes where a misstep meant injury or worse. Runners carried their messages over mountain ridges, through dried riverbeds, along crumbling coastal trails where the sea sprayed up like warning. There were no mile markers, no shade huts, no carved signs, only memory and instinct. Messages were often written on thin scrolls of papyrus or parchment, easily damaged, impossible to replace. So runners kept them close, wrapped in cloth, tucked against their chest beneath a tunic. Some were sealed with wax to mark their authenticity. A broken seal meant suspicion. A tampered scroll could mean betrayal, but not every message was written. Many were oral, memorized, rehearsed, and trusted to the mind of the runner, especially in matters of secrecy. It was dangerous to carry sensitive information on paper. Easier to forget it after it was spoken, easier to deny ever hearing it if stopped. So runners trained not just their legs, but their minds. Imagine reciting an entire diplomatic message, names, demands, dates, while climbing a hill in midday heat, while watching for bandits, while dehydrated, while exhausted, and still arriving with every word intact. That was the expectation. And if the runner forgot, if the message was altered or late or lost, there were no second chances. A city could fall, a deal could fail, a war could begin. The consequences were not just personal, they were political. A slow runner wasn't just inefficient, they were dangerous. So who became a runner? Usually men, usually young, but not always. Some were hired for a single journey. Others worked regularly, known for their reliability. They weren't rich. They weren't noble, but they were vital, trusted, quiet, fast, and yet they weren't celebrated.
Ow!
There are no long lists of ancient Greek runners, no monuments, no recorded names beyond a few legendary figures like Pheidippides. Their work was invisible by design. If they did their job right, the message arrived. That was all that mattered. What's remarkable is how much depended on so little. No infrastructure, no standard routes, no chain of command. Just a man, a scroll, and the endless road between cities. It was a network built on trust, on sweat, on memory, and on a deep understanding that information was power, but only if it moved. It's easy to wonder why the Greeks ran. Their cultures didn't, at least. Not quite like this. The Persian Empire had horses, and with them, an entire system of mounted couriers that stretched across vast territories. Messages sealed and official were passed from rider to rider, galloping between way stations along what was known as the Royal Road. Later, the Romans would perfect this model, building roads so precise and enduring that some still survive, and establishing courier posts to move orders, intelligence, and diplomacy with speed. But in ancient Greece, they ran. Not because they didn't know about horses. They had them, especially among the wealthy, especially in wartime. But horses were costly. They needed grain and stables and someone to care for them. They were status symbols, not public infrastructure. And perhaps most importantly, they weren't practical in the places where Greek messages most often needed to go. Greece is not a land of wide, flat plains. It's a land of stone, of slope and cliff, of narrow coastal trails and winding paths that disappear into olive groves. Roads were rarely straight. Many were not roads at all, but footpaths carved through repetition by shepherds, traders, or runners like Pheidippides. A horse could manage some of these paths, but not gracefully, not quickly, not safely. A loose rock or narrow ledge might stop a horse in its tracks, or worse, throw it over the edge. The same terrain that made Greece beautiful also made it a difficult place to ride, but a runner could slip through where horses couldn't. He could adjust his path step by step. He could pivot, backtrack, climb, and press forward with a kind of agility no animal could match. While a mounted courier needed wide roads and clear turns, a runner needed only space for his feet and the memory of which way to go. Compared to the vast Persian system, which relied on well-planned infrastructure and strict organization, Greek communication was looser. It's more fragile, but it worked for its landscape. The city-states of Greece didn't share one postal service. They didn't trust each other enough to build one. Each polis handled its own affairs. Each relied on its own people. In that sense, the Greeks didn't have a communication network. They had men. Men who knew the land, who could endure long hours on unforgiving trails, and who could carry not just scrolls, but the responsibility of getting them there. There were trade-offs. A runner moved slower than a horse on flat ground, carried less. He tired, he could fall, he could forget. But in the mountains, along the coast, through ravines and valleys, a runner was more reliable than a rider. He was harder to spot, easier to feed, and he didn't panic at the sound of a thunderclap or the edge of a ledge. Even so, the Greeks weren't the only ones to use runners. Other cultures had them too, as messengers in hard-to-reach places, as secondary options. But in Greece, runners weren't the backup. They were the standard. That's what makes this network so human, so vulnerable, so admirable. It wasn't built with bricks and stables. It was built with bodies. It relied not on systems, but on individuals, sweating, silent, solitary, moving through the land with a scroll and a purpose. Where other empires galloped, Greece trudged, not because it was behind, but because it knew the terrain. It knew that sometimes the fastest way wasn't the fanciest. It was just the way someone could take on foot. Not every message in ancient Greece was carried by a trained runner. Not every scroll rode on the hips of someone swift and prepared. Often the truth was far messier. Sometimes there simply wasn't time. There were no permanent teams of couriers stationed in every city. No rosters of trained hippodromoi waiting in clean sandals with fresh legs. In moments of urgency, a border skirmish, a sudden death, an approaching army, whoever was nearby might be given the scroll. That meant the messenger could be anyone. A farmer finishing his day in the fields, a shepherd collecting his tools, a potter, a shopkeeper, a boy barely grown, not trained, not equipped, not familiar with the roads between cities, just available. Someone breathing, someone who could walk, someone who could be told, "Take this now." And so they did. They weren't fast, they weren't reliable, but they were there. That counted for something. Sometimes the journey was short, a neighboring village, a message delivered within a few hours. But sometimes it was longer, a place they'd never been, direction they barely understood. No map, no preparation, just a sealed scroll and the nervous instruction. Don't lose it. They may have asked no questions. They may have asked too many. They may have taken a long detour, stopped to rest, gotten distracted by a relative along the way. They may have dropped the scroll or arrived only to forget who they were supposed to find. It's not because they were lazy, but because they were untrained, because they were human. These weren't messengers by trade. They were civilians caught in the machinery of necessity. In contrast, there were runners who were known, trusted, hired repeatedly. Names passed from one official to another. St. Leandros. He knows the trail to Argos. He's quick. Or, use Melita again. She remembered the entire message last time, word for word. These individuals developed reputations, not famous, not publicly celebrated. But within the networks of those who needed things done, they were remembered. Some could read. Most could not. But that didn't always matter. So often the job wasn't to understand. It was simply to arrive. The difference between a trusted messenger and a pressed local wasn't just speed. It was reliability. A trusted runner knew how to protect the message in a sudden downpour, knew which side of the hill held less wind, knew the way light hit the stones near dusk and how to avoid twisting an ankle on the loose shale that slid beneath the feet. They knew how to move not just forward, but safely, efficiently. A pressed farmer did not. But still, both were used, because the message had to move. And the world didn't always offer ideal options. It's a strange kind of vulnerability, isn't it? That decisions shaping life and death, war and peace, sometimes depended on a stranger plucked from the street. A person who didn't ask for the burden, who may not even have understood its weight. Sometimes those pressed into service did well. Sometimes they rose to the occasion, moved quickly, arrived on time, remembered the details, but sometimes they didn't, and history shifted for it. All it took was one wrong turn, one forgotten name, one misplaced scroll in the pocket of a tunic worn too thin, one nap beneath a tree that lasted longer than it should have, and the message arrived too late, or didn't arrive at all. That was the fragility of the system. A runner, even an experienced one, was still just one person. And when they failed, whether they were a professional or a panicked farmer, there was often no backup, no second scroll. No one else sent behind them, only silence. And silence in ancient Greece could be louder than a declaration. So the cities kept running on this uneven mix of reliability and improvisation. Sometimes you got Leandros. Sometimes you got the neighbor's teenage son. And you hoped desperately that either one would be enough. In the end, messages didn't care who carried them, only that they arrived. To understand ancient Greece, you have to let go of the idea of one unified nation. There was no Greece, not in the way we think of countries today. There were city-states, independent, self-governed, and fiercely proud. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Delos, Rhodes. Each one a world unto itself, with its own laws, its own army, its own currency, and its own ambitions. And yet, despite their differences, and often their rivalries, they still had to talk to one another. They had to coordinate, had to communicate across hills and islands and long stretches of silence, because war loomed often. Alliances shifted, treaties were forged and broken, harvests failed, trade routes opened, enemies moved. Accurate, timely, and trusted was everything. So how did they do it? Without telegraphs, without newspapers, without standing armies of diplomats or fleets of signal fires stretching across the land, they did it by sending people. Messengers, runners, envoys, trusted citizens carrying news, instructions, or delicate proposals from one city to another. Sometimes on parchment, often in memory, or required swift coordination. If a threat appeared near the border, the city could not act alone. Allies had to be warned, reinforcements requested, plans shared. A runner might leave Thebes at dusk, sprinting overland to Delphi by morning, passing on the urgent call. Send troops, prepare defenses, the enemy has moved. And each message required precision. A delay of a single day could change everything. An alliance could crumble. A city could fall. In diplomacy, the process was slower, but just as vital. City-states arranged marriages between ruling families. They negotiated terms of trade. They offered peace terms or demanded tribute. These matters were often delivered not by runners, but by envoys. Formal representatives who traveled on foot, yes, but with more ceremony. They might carry a staff or seal to signify authority. They might be escorted depending on the danger of the road or the importance of the message. Still, they traveled as all messages did, step by step, overland, through villages, through terrain. Every word they carried was a promise of cooperation or a warning of intent. In news flowed through this same fragile web. Births, deaths, elections, religious festivals, natural disasters, victories in the Olympic Games, the appointment of a new magistrate, the sighting of a fleet off the coast. Some of it traveled through trade, merchants talking in taverns, sailors whispering in ports. But when something had to be made official, it was written, sealed, and sent. Not with flair, just with urgency. You can imagine it. A scroll tied with twine, passed from the hands of a scribe to a lean runner with calloused feet. No title, no payment up front, just instructions. Get this to Corinth. Deliver it into the hands of the strategos. Make sure it gets there before the third day. And off he would go. It wasn't perfect. Messages were lost, delayed, forgotten. Cities misread intentions. Treaties fell through because a scroll arrived after a sword had already been drawn. But it worked. More often than not, because people understood what was at stake. Coordination wasn't just about politics, it was survival. One city couldn't stand alone for long. It needed its neighbors, even when it didn't like them. Even when war seemed easier than alliance. There were coalitions, leagues of cities who agreed to defend one another. The Delian League, led by Athens. The Peloponnesian League, dominated by Sparta. These alliances created more formal lines of communication, with regular updates sent between cities. Still no system, still no schedule, but more structure, more expectation, when things truly mattered, when all else failed. Cities sent someone they trusted to speak in person. So they didn't just send messages, they sent themselves. A voice instead of a scroll. Handshake instead of a seal. That was diplomacy in ancient Greece. Not a system of polished bureaucracy, but a human web of runners and speakers, moving through a land of stone and pride. Coordination meant motion. It meant feet on the ground. And always the hope that the message would arrive before the next crisis did. Not every message in ancient Greece could be trusted to parchment. Some words were simply too dangerous to write down. An order to attack, plan to betray, fragile alliance, or a quiet surrender. Written on scrolls, such things could be stolen, altered, or intercepted. So instead they were memorized. Trusted runners and envoys became walking vaults, not just delivering messages, but becoming them. They didn't carry secrets. They were the secret. In a world without encryption, oral memory was a kind of living code. Runners trained not just their legs, but their minds. They learned to repeat long strings of words with precision. Not just the content, but the pauses, the tone, even the rhythm. They recited the message again and again as they ran, whispering to themselves along dusty paths or mouthing the words under a moonless sky. For sensitive matters, this was safer than any scroll. Nothing written, nothing to be read. Nothing to betray if caught, at least not easily. Still, memory is a fragile thing, especially after 20 miles in the heat. After a sleepless night, after a stumble or a scare, one forgotten phrase could change the meaning. One misplaced word could shift a message from warning to insult, from peace to provocation. Worked in so. Runners trained in techniques to hold the words steady. Some used rhythm, repeating the message like a song or chant. Others used images, tying each part of the message to landmarks along the route. A bend in the road meant the name of a city. A tree at a crossroads might mean hold your forces. The landscape itself became a mnemonic map. Sometimes messages were encoded more deliberately. A name replaced by a number, phrase with hidden meaning known only to the recipient. In rare cases, physical tricks were used, scrolls hidden inside wax balls or etched under layers of beeswax on a wooden tablet. Some messages used simple invisible inks like lemon juice, revealed only when warmed. These methods were clever, but also delicate and often unreliable. More often, memory alone was trusted. If the message was intercepted, it couldn't be read or broken open. But the runner could still be questioned, threatened, hurt. There was no way to delete the words once they were stored in a person's mind. So messengers had to be not just accurate, but resilient, able to hold their silence under pressure, to stall, to mislead if needed. Some were instructed to speak false messages if intercepted, a verbal decoy that would be corrected when the real one was delivered. Still, not every runner was trained. Sometimes a message was pressed into the hands or the head of a local who wasn't tea ready. A farmer, a laborer, a youth. Someone told to remember something delicate and hope it stuck. And so mistakes were made. Messages forgotten, orders altered. History nudged sideways by human memory, because while writing could be destroyed, memory could fade. While scrolls could be sealed, a mouth could still open. That was the balance, the security of silence versus the risk of forgetting. The more secret a message, the more fragile it became. And yet these systems endured, not through technology, but through trust, through discipline, through sheer, careful repetition. In that way, messengers were more than just runners. They were guardians of meaning. Their minds were parchment. Their mouths locked doors. They whispered to themselves with every step. They spoke to no one. If they did their job well, no one ever knew just how much they remembered. Till one day, they reached the gates and opened their mouths and changed the course of things. In a world without instant messaging, missed communication wasn't an inconvenience. It was a risk, a delay, a silence, and sometimes a disaster. Ancient Greece relied on runners, on word of mouth, on messages carried by foot through difficult terrain. When things worked, it was a marvel of human determination. But when they didn't, the consequences could echo far louder than any footsteps on gravel. A message that didn't arrive in time could mean the difference between a city prepared and a city surprised. Between a defensive formation at the gate and an enemy walking through it. A request for reinforcements delayed by a single day might mean an ally arrives to find nothing left but smoke and ash. And because there was no way to check in along the route, no pigeons to update progress, no network of alerts. If a runner didn't appear, the sender had no way of knowing whether the message was simply late or lost forever. City-states often operated with minimal margin for error. A plan for coordinated defense required not just shared intent, but synchronized timing. Sparta might agree to send troops by the full moon. Athens might plan their move based on that understanding. But if the confirming scroll was delayed by a storm, or if the runner twisted his ankle crossing the Tagitas Mountains, the alliance might fall apart. Athens might act alone. Sparta might not act at all. And what began as mutual defense could unravel into resentment, blame, and isolation. Delays didn't always mean catastrophe, but they almost always meant confusion. And confusion in politics or battle is a dangerous thing. Imagine a runner dispatched from Corinth, carrying urgent news. A fleet spotted off the coast, likely hostile. He's meant to alert the cities of the Peloponnesian League. But midway through the journey, he's caught in a flash flood. He finds shelter in a shepherd's hut. He waits out the storm. Day passes. 2. By the time he arrives, the fleet has landed. The message is no longer a warning. It's a postscript. Or imagine a treaty. 2 cities agree on terms of peace. Each side sends a messenger with their signed portion of the agreement meant to arrive and be exchanged simultaneously. But one runner is delayed. Poor weather, or bandits, or just the exhaustion of a poorly chosen replacement. The other city waits, sees nothing, grows suspicious, assumes bad faith, and resumes hostilities before learning that peace had already been offered. It happened more than once, because the Greeks, for all their innovation and philosophy, still had to face the limits of distance and the fragility of human delivery. Their world was fast-paced in ambition, but slow in motion. And so silence became dangerous. When a message was late, it wasn't just inconvenient. It created a vacuum, space where fear, rumor, or assumption rushed in. Some city-states learned to hedge their decisions, sending multiple messengers by different routes, or embedding memorized versions of the same message in separate minds. But even that wasn't foolproof. And when tensions were high, During wartime, during negotiation, during transitions of leadership, timing mattered more than clarity. You could say the right thing, still be too late. This created a culture of cautious waiting. Cities learned to read not just the messages that arrived, but the ones that didn't. If a runner was overdue, it could mean he was intercepted, or that the sender had changed their mind, or worse, that no message had ever been sent. Trust began to unravel, not just from what was said, but from what wasn't. In some ways, it's remarkable that communication worked at all, that battles were coordinated, that alliances were made and honored, that diplomacy did move forward, step by step, on aching feet and through uncertain paths, but still, the silences haunted them. Over time, some city-states began building more formal courier systems, using relays, training specific messengers, signing escorts, trying to bring predictability to the unpredictable. It helped. But even then, one slipped stone, one wrong turn, one moment of hesitation could unravel months of planning. That was the quiet power of the ancient Greek messenger, not in their speed, but in the weight of what they carried, and the devastation that could follow if they didn't. When we think of ancient Greece, certain names float easily to the surface: Socrates, Pericles, Herodotus, Leonidas, philosopher, the statesman, the storyteller, the warrior. Their legacies are carved into stone, sung by bards, quoted in classrooms. These were the figures remembered, the ones cast in marble and written into legend. But for every statue that stood, there were dozens, hundreds, who carried the words that made that statue possible. And they are almost all forgotten. The message runners, they were not honored with odes. No dramas were staged in their name. They rarely appeared in history books except as background noise. Unnamed legs beneath the ideas, the laws, the declarations of war and peace. And yet without them, none of it would have happened, because no politician's speech would matter if it couldn't reach the next city. No alliance could form if the terms couldn't be delivered. No heroic last stand could be commemorated without someone running, panting, blistered, unnoticed, to say it had occurred. Still, the runners remained invisible. They were commoners, almost always, drawn from the lower classes. They owned little, were paid little, and were expected to endure much. They didn't argue in public forums or dine in marble courtyards. They ran through dirt, slept on stone, ate barley and olives, if they ate at all. Meanwhile, the poets were composing verses about the gods and the glory of kings. Politicians gave speeches that echoed across stone amphitheaters. Generals stood atop city walls in polished armor, taking credit for victories that had been coordinated by runners no one named. And in the background, the message carriers kept moving. There's something deeply human in that. The way history favors the voice over the vessel, the idea over the legs that brought it. It's the noble over the necessary. But it's also a little tragic, because runners were not just messengers, they were lifelines, infrastructure in human form. And yet, when the city gathered for festivals or remembered the dead, it was the heroes who were honored, the statesmen whose strategies were recited. It's not the man who delivered the strategy through a storm, soaked and shivering, without rest. Not the woman who whispered the terms of truce after sprinting through the night. They got no statues, no poetry, sometimes not even a name. There is a word for them: hemerodromoi, day-long runners. But the word feels clinical. It doesn't hold the ache in the knees, the rasp of dry breath, the quiet pride of arriving just in time. It doesn't hold the loneliness of the road, the constant awareness that failure might mean more than personal shame. It might mean death, war, ruin. Still, the runners weren't martyrs. They didn't expect glory. Most were practical, anonymous, dutiful. They accepted their role as essential and uncelebrated. And in a way, that was their strength. They didn't run for applause. They ran because someone needed to know, because the scroll had to arrive. Because without them, the very fabric of Greek political life, its alliances, arguments, and ambitions would fall apart. Even Pheidippides, the so-called father of all message runners, was remembered more as a symbol than a person. His name is now bound to erase the marathon, but most don't know he ran far more than 26 miles. Or that he died not at marathon, but days later. Or that he was one of many, just one body among countless others who carried the weight of words across a rugged land. And so, while the statues stood and the poets performed, the runners faded. Not because they weren't vital, but because their stories didn't pause long enough to be told. They were already off again, down the road, into the dust and silence, while history was busy composing its next ode to someone with a louder voice. While the runners rose with the first gray light of dawn, tightening worn sandals around sore feet, the elite of ancient Greece were often still at rest, reclining on low couches and shaded courtyards, letting the morning breeze stir the scent of pressed olives and crushed mint. These were the orators, generals, landowners, and scholars, men of means, influence, and reputation. Their minds, not their bodies, were their currency. Their words shaped decisions, their presence commanded respect. And yet, behind every elegant phrase spoken in the assembly, behind every careful maneuver on the battlefield, was a runner. Tired, unsung, and essential. The elite had the privilege of pacing their thoughts. A general might take hours to draft a strategy. A statesman might rehearse his speech for days. Their messages were formed in comfort, composed in shaded rooms, read aloud to scribes, then sealed with wax. But once the scroll was rolled and tied, its fate belonged not to the thinker, but to the carrier. That's where the runner entered, stepping into the dust with no weapon but urgency, no protection but speed. The general's clever plan would never reach its allied commander without him. The orator's brilliant words would fall into silence if not repeated, by breathless mouth or tired hand in another city's square, and still, only one of them would be remembered. The runner had no symposium, no place in the gymnasium debates. While philosophers pondered justice under olive trees, runners were dodging loose stones on goat paths. While senators dined on lamb and figs, messengers were chewing hard barley crust and hoping not to twist an ankle before dusk. There is a kind of quiet injustice in it. The elite were celebrated not just for what they said, but for how they appeared. Their robes were clean, their hands soft, their public performances well-timed. A general entered a city to trumpet and acclaim. A poet's words echoed for centuries. Even a poorly executed speech might be recorded, remembered, quoted in future halls. But a runner, no matter how perfect the delivery, how fast the time, how critical the message, was barely acknowledged. If he arrived late, he was blamed. If he arrived early, the scroll was read, and he was forgotten. The physical strain they endured would have stunned the very people who gave them orders. Blisters layered over blisters, muscles pulled and ignored, stomach knots, sunstroke, dehydration, fear. And yet they moved. They moved because it was their job. They moved because someone had to, because standing still meant failure. In contrast, the elite moved only when ceremony demanded it. A general on parade, flanked by guards, an orator entering the agora, surrounded by curious listeners. Their steps were measured, their gestures deliberate. Their exertion was performance, not necessity. And while the runners faded into the background, the thinkers became immortalized, not just in marble, but in memory. Plato's dialogues, Demosthenes' speeches, Pericles' funeral oration, These echo through time. But none of them mention the man who carried the scroll, who ran without rest to deliver the invitation, the proclamation, the declaration of war. No credit, no statue, no name. It was the orator's voice that stirred hearts, but it was the runner's body that got the words there in time. And still, the runner remained low in social standing. It's barely more than a servant, disposable, replaceable. You could hire one. You could press one into service. And if he died on the road, he simply found another. Meanwhile, the elite were elevated, given wreaths, banquets, tributes, praised not just for their ideas, but for being, for representing the best of what society imagined itself to be. Refined, rational, dominant. But ideas alone didn't move a culture. They had to travel. And it was the runner sweating, aching, often afraid, who made movement possible. So while the elite discussed glory in shaded courts, the runner was living something closer to reality, feet bleeding, stomach empty. Hopes pinned on weather, terrain, luck, and no one waiting to applaud him at the end. Just a nod, maybe a crust of bread, and then the next scroll. The ancient world loved stories. It wrapped its history in myth, its politics in theater, and its people in poetry. The bards sang of gods and warriors, kings and clever tricksters. Homer gave us Achilles, swift and wrathful, Odysseus, cunning and cursed. There were hymns to Athena, epics for the Spartans, victories immortalized in verse. But you'll search a long time before you find a line, even one, praising the aching legs of a message runner. No stanzas for the sore arches, no odes for the missing toenails, no reverence for the one who simply delivered the news. Yet someone had to. While the heroes of legend were slaying beasts or delivering speeches from mountaintops, the runners were in the hills, lone, out of breath, carrying the words that would soon be polished into legend, but never included in it. Glory in the ancient Greek imagination was something loud. It was the clash of bronze, the roar of a crowd, the flourish of rhetoric. It wasn't quiet footsteps before dawn. It wasn't dust-covered feet or a cramp below the ribs that wouldn't let go. It wasn't doing your job and being forgotten the moment the scroll was unrolled. But perhaps it should have been, because there's a kind of quiet nobility in what the runners did. Not dramatic, not glorious, but vital. Their work was often thankless, repetitive, anonymous, but it mattered. It's not in the way that wins laurel wreaths, but in the way that holds everything else together. Still, the ancient poets weren't writing about that. They weren't singing of the man who ran 70 miles without sleep, only to collapse before his message could be heard. They weren't composing verse for the woman who carried word of a peace treaty through storm and darkness, then turned around the next morning to run back with the reply. Their attention was on the spectacular, gods throwing lightning, warriors cleaving their enemies in two, orators bringing cities to silence with a single phrase. These were the moments that lingered in collective memory. And so history was written upward, toward fame, toward grandeur, toward the divine. The runners didn't fit. They weren't metaphors. They weren't symbols of destiny. They were just people, tired, determined, often overlooked. Even Pheidippides, the one runner who did enter legend, became myth only after he died. And even then, the myth was changed. We remember the sprint from Marathon to Athens, 26 miles, not the 140-mile journey before that. From Athens to Sparta, begging for aid. Long suffering was shortened into a clean, heroic finish, dramatic, palatable, ready for retelling. But no one wrote of his exhaustion. No one paused to honor the swelling in his joints, the hours without food, the dread of failure ticking behind every step. That wasn't the stuff of legend, but it was the truth. The reality of message running was repetition, not revelation. You weren't always delivering history in the making. Sometimes it was mundane, a supply request, a tax notice, an invitation. Still you ran. Still you bore the weight. You ran for cities that wouldn't name you. You ran through terrain that didn't care if you twisted your ankle or not. And when you finished, the only reward might be another scroll and another road. But even if the poets didn't see it, there was meaning in that. There was something steady and admirable in doing your part while others sang of glory. Something honest in running hard while others posed with their spears. Because if the words didn't arrive, the glory didn't happen. If the scroll didn't reach the general, there was no brilliant strategy. If the news didn't reach the assembly, there was no debate, no speech, no applause. If the warning didn't reach the walls, the enemy came unchallenged. Runners didn't need ballads to know their value, but maybe they deserved one. Not a grand epic, not a symphony of gods and monsters, just a soft, steady song about bare feet on stone, about breath and silence, about doing what had to be done, even if no one clapped, even if no one remembered your name. The ancient world was built on bodies. Some stood in marble, some sat in council. Many more ran in silence, used, broken, and forgotten. The message runner belonged to that last group. His body was his tool, his burden, his ticket to usefulness, and eventually, his reason for being cast aside. There was no retirement plan for a message runner, no pension, no ceremonial farewell. You ran until your knees failed, until your lungs burned, until someone younger and faster replaced you. Maybe you limped away to some quiet village, bones stiff and calluses deep, hoping the weather wouldn't turn your old injuries into daily aches. Maybe you took up another job if your legs allowed it. Maybe you just disappeared from the record, because records didn't track you. They tracked who sent the message, who received it, who authored the thought, not who carried it through the rain across rocky hills. Past thieves and storms on feet that had long stopped feeling much of anything. The body of the runner was a tool, expected to endure, praised only in its silence, its speed, its obedience. Damned when that body broke, when blisters cracked too deep, when tendons tore, when breath grew unreliable. The tool was replaced. The scroll handed to another. The journey begun again. That was the exchange. Endurance for invisibility. Even in times of peace, the message runner was not protected from wear. They still ran. Between city-states, between magistrates, between merchants. And each run carved its toll into muscle and bone. There's a certain brutality in how they were forgotten, not because they were hated, not because they failed, but because they succeeded so quietly. The world moved on their feet, but the world rarely looked down. History wrote its name upward, toward those with scrolls in their hands, not those who sweat to deliver them. Occasionally, one runner might be remembered, a name passed down in a footnote, a whisper in a speech. But most weren't. Most ended as they lived, in motion, uncelebrated. It's easy now, centuries later, to romanticize the idea of the ancient courier, to imagine it as noble, rugged, a badge of honor. But that's the comfort of distance. The real story was much harder. Aching bodies, dirty feet, crude sandals cutting into flesh, bruises from falls that didn't have time to be treated. No laurels, no poetry, no medals. Just the unspoken understanding that the message had to arrive. Their legacy wasn't carved into stone. It was worn into the paths between cities. Etched into the dirt by souls that passed again and again with no applause, no trail of followers. Their lives were short or quiet or both. And when they ended, the dust simply settled. The same dust they had once kicked up behind them. There's something profoundly human about that. To be necessary but invisible. To hold the world together without being held up yourself. The runners were not myth. They were not heroes in the grand sculpted sense. They were bodies, moving, fading, necessary, forgotten. But maybe now, as we look back, as we whisper stories into sleep and let ancient hills rise in our minds, maybe there's a quiet kind of honoring we can do. It's not by rewriting the past, not by pretending these runners were praised in their time, but by remembering them now. Not their names, perhaps, but their motion. Not their faces, but their endurance. Not their glory, but their dust. Because even in silence, even in obscurity, they mattered. And that's a kind of legacy too. So now, as you lie still, breathing slowly, let your mind drift back one last time to those narrow roads of ancient Greece. The hills, the dust, the wind, all still there, waiting, unchanged by time. But the runners, they are long gone. Their steps have disappeared behind history. They didn't leave journals. They didn't write speeches. They left no statues or schools of thought. No one built temples in their name. They ran, and when they were done, they vanished back into the quiet from which they came. And still, they held the world together. They stitched one city to another with footsteps. They carried peace, carried war, carried dreams. And while others earned glory through swords and ideas, the runner earned it in silence. One aching mile at a time. Their stories weren't written down, but maybe that's the point. Maybe their story was the motion itself. The rhythm of tired feet on packed earth, the steady breath in cold air, the scroll against the chest, the road unrolling ahead like a duty. They didn't need to be remembered to matter. And now, in this quiet moment, far from ancient stones and forgotten roots, maybe we can carry their memory forward. Not in song, not in story, but in stillness, in appreciation, in the awareness that history wasn't just made by voices, it was also made by feet. So rest now. Let the runners fade back into the mist of time. They've earned their sleep, and so have you. So now, as you lie still, breathing slowly, let your mind drift back one last time to those narrow roads of ancient Greece. The hills, the dust, the wind, all still there, waiting unchanged by time. But the runners, they are long gone. Their steps have disappeared behind history. They didn't leave journals. They didn't write speeches. They left no statues or schools of thought. No one built temples in their name. They ran, and when they were done, they vanished back into the quiet from which they came. And still, they held the world together. They stitched one city to another with footsteps. They carried peace, carried war, carried dreams. While others earned glory through swords and ideas, the runner earned it in silence, one aching mile at a time. They didn't get their names remembered, but without them, none of it worked. No battles were won, no alliances forged, no history written. The ideas of the great only traveled because someone ran, unseen and unsung. Their stories weren't written down. But maybe that's the point. Maybe their story was the motion itself. The rhythm of tired feet on packed earth, the steady breath in cold air, the scroll against the chest. The road unrolling ahead like a duty. They didn't need to be remembered to matter. And now, in this quiet moment, far from ancient stones and forgotten roots, maybe we can carry their memory forward. Not in song, not in story, but in stillness, in appreciation, in the awareness that history wasn't just made by voices, it was also made by feet. So rest now. Let the runners fade back into the mist of time. They've earned their sleep. So have you. In the end, It always returns to one figure, not a general, not a poet, not a name carved into stone. It's just a runner, alone in the dust. Picture him again, where we began. His shadow long in the low sun, sandals worn thin, a sealed message tied close to his chest. No crowd cheers him on. No artist sketches his effort. No historian notes the exact moment his foot met the road. And yet there he is, moving, always moving. His path winds along the edges of the world others get to talk about. There, through valleys no one names, over hills no map quite gets right. He knows the trail only because his body remembers it, a rhythm passed down in muscle and breath, a silent choreography repeated 1,000 times. And when he's gone, there's nothing left. No monument. There's no line in a book. Just faint imprints where his feet once landed, slowly fading. Footsteps in dust. It's strange, isn't it? It's how much the world relied on people like him. Not for glory. Not for vision. For the simplest, most essential thing. Connection. One person carrying words to another. One tired body holding a fragile message that might change everything. And if he didn't arrive, things unraveled. Battles failed. Treaties collapsed. Moments were missed, but he did arrive. Over and over again, quietly, invisibly, and then he disappeared, swallowed up by history. So tonight, as your thoughts grow softer and your breathing settles, let the image of that runner linger for just a moment longer, not in sadness, not in pity, but in recognition. Because in his silent endurance, there's something familiar, something human. We all carry things no one sees. We all walk roads without applause, and still we go on. So let the runner fade into the haze of time. Let his footprints dissolve into the earth. He did what he came to do. And now, finally, you can rest too. In the end, it always returns to one figure. Not a general, not a poet, not a name carved into stone. Just a runner, alone in the dust. Picture him again where we began, his shadow stretched by the low sun, sandals worn thin, a sealed message tied close to his chest. No cheering crowd, no statues in his honor, just the long road ahead and a task no one else sees. He moves not for glory, but because someone must. The hills rise in silence. The wind offers no comfort, and still he runs, alone in the hills. Heart racing, lungs burning, he pushes on. Not for applause, not for praise, but because the message matters. Because without him, the words go nowhere. The cities stay divided. The decisions never reach the people who need them. His effort disappears behind history, but the effects ripple through it all the same. When he's gone, there's nothing left but fading footprints. Quote. No written record, just the soft memory of a body that gave everything and asked nothing. It's strange how much the ancient world rested on the shoulders of those no one remembered. But maybe in the quiet, we can remember. It's not their names, but their presence. It's not their achievements, but their endurance. That solitary runner is more than history forgot. He is what history was made of. Quiet effort, invisible labor, tireless steps. And now, as your thoughts slow and the world begins to soften around you, let the image of that runner stay with you for just a few moments longer. And not out of sadness, but out of respect. Because in his solitude, there is a reflection of all of us. Moving through life with unseen burdens, unseen strength. Let him fade now, gently into the hills. His message has been delivered, and now you can rest. The wind picks up again, just a little, soft against the hills, empty now. Quiet, the runner is gone. Only the path remains. Winding between olive trees and over stone ridges, worn smooth by years of hurried feet and urgent messages. But now, there is no urgency, No breathless climb, no scroll in hand, just stillness. The footsteps that once echoed across the land have faded, slowly, gently, like ripples vanishing on water. The world is calm now, and so are you. You can rest now. The message has been delivered.